Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our informational webinar, the Snowy Plovers at Great Salt Lake. My name is Max Malmquist, and I'm the Engagement Manager for Audubon Saline Lakes program. And I am going to be your MC this evening. And before I turn it over to our presenters, I have a few housekeeping items. This is a webinar format, so your microphones are disabled to avoid background noise. But we do have a couple of ways for you to communicate with our presenters through the boxes at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you play around with your mouse towards the bottom in the middle, there should be two boxes. One that is labeled chat. You can use that to send us messages. And if you would like, put your name, where you're joining us from this evening, and what species of bird you are excited to see now that we're on the cusp of spring migration. Also, next to the chat box, just a little bit to the right, there should also be a Q&A box. If you have any questions throughout the evening, feel free to type those into that Q&A box, and we'll make sure to answer as many questions as possible towards the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, so anyone who has registered should receive a link with the recording in the next week or so. And then finally, just to keep you on your toes, we do have a few quiz questions scattered throughout the webinar, so be ready to type in your answers as we go. And with that, I'm going to throw in our first question. What flyway are you joining us from? If you're out here in the West, you're in the Pacific Flyway. Ooh, it looks like we've already got some folks joining us from the Central Flyway, Atlantic. Awesome. Give it a few more seconds. All right. Check out the results here. Wow, looks like what, 25 people from the Pacific Flyway. We've got 4 folks from the Central Flyway. It looks in the chat like we've got someone from Asheville, North Carolina. Awesome. All right. All right, we can hop to the next slide. All right, I'm going to now turn it over to Heidi to share a little bit about our Snowy Plover team. Heidi?
Thank you, Max, and welcome everybody. We're so happy that you're here to learn about our program. So first, I'd like to introduce our team. This is an Audubon program shared by Gillmor Sanctuary, of whom I am the senior manager out at Gillmor Sanctuary on Great Salt Lake, and joined by Chelsea Cameron, our assistant land manager there as well. And then we have M. Hamill, ecologist, and Max Malmquist, already introduced, our engagement manager from the Saline Lakes program. And we couldn't do this without our important partners from Tracy Aviary. At their conservation team, we have Angie Trumbo and Bryant Olson and Tully Frayne, and they'll be talking more about the parts that they contribute to this overall project. And we also have a volunteer with us who is tried and true through the beginning pilot study years, Mike Malmquist, also father of Max. And he is one of our local bird experts and lead volunteer. So we can go to the next one and we'll start talking about the birds that we care so much about. So this is a monitoring program for the Snowy Plovers we've mentioned, and we particularly are focusing on their nesting population at the south shore of Great Salt Lake. These birds are absolutely adorable. We're showing you the adult form and the chicks here in the photos, and they are really, even though they're just pale brown and white, I think it's just as much their charisma is owed to their actual personality that you can see in their behaviors out on the beach. They forage for invertebrates, which are small insects and larvae, on the beaches, both at the oceans or the saline lakes, which we have here in inland. Their eggs are so well camouflaged that the photos actually show them fairly well at the bottom of your slide, but they really blend in well with the rocks and stubble or just basic debris on the beach. They're very, very hard to find. And unfortunately, the snowy plover population in general is experiencing a widespread decline. And in fact, the Pacific coast population is listed as threatened. And the interior population that comes here to Great Salt Lake is listed in the state of Utah as a species of greatest conservation need.
Thanks, Heidi. And before we jump to the next slide, we've got another fun question for you. So let me start another poll. All right. So Heidi mentioned those declines that we're seeing with snowy plovers. What is threatening snowy plover nesting around Great Salt Lake? We've got climate change, urban development, human recreation activities, and all of the above. All right. Give you a few more seconds. Got most of our folks responding. Okay. Correct answer is all of the above. Yes, climate change, urban development, human recreation activities, all of these things are threatening snowy plovers and their habitat and nesting activities around Great Salt Lake and other places as well throughout their breeding range.
Thanks, Max. So let's talk a little bit more about those threats and stressors that are impacting these birds. If you look at this map of the states on the right, you'll see these orange areas strewn across the states and then down across Central America. These are the areas that are important to breeding for these the species, and the two most important in the states are Great Salt Lake and then another area on the interior Midwest. We since we are host of the most important area to these birds, we really want to understand why they may be in decline, their population might be in decline. And so at Great Salt Lake, we have noticed over the years that there's an increasing number of predators, just access, people approaching the lake, predators tend to follow those people, habitat loss and degradation, and salinity and water levels may be impacting their prey base. And then with the changing, with the trends with the changing climate, we are experiencing more extreme weather events. That could be also another factor. But mainly, the one that we think that we can have something that we could maybe have an influence on is the disturbance related to human activities. And so with this study, we are focusing on the human disturbance related to human recreation use with people that are accessing this location in the South Shore of Great Salt Lake, because that's it also happens to be one of the most highly accessed area by people. There aren't very many places around the lake where people can get to the shoreline and see Great Salt Lake. So if that's the place where we can make an impact by teaching people what we learned, that's why we are focusing on this particular area.
So with that, we're gonna jump into kind of the overall goals of our project and, you know, what we're hoping to get out of this study. So we've identified three overarching goals for our data collection and research at Great Salt Lake. The first being to understand the status of the snowy plover population and the breeding success at the South Shore of Great Salt Lake. There have been widespread studies about breeding success and the status of the birds at this region of the lake in a long time. So we're hoping to contribute to that data set through this monitoring program. We're also trying to determine if human-associated disturbance is negatively impacting the nest success of snowy plovers at this location. As Heidi mentioned, this is a highly accessed portion of the lake, and there are human recreation activities ranging from folks walking their dogs to folks flying motorized aerial vehicles to all sorts of things that happen at the lake. And we're also hoping to use the information that we're collecting to inform management strategies and conservation actions, and also identify opportunities for community engagement in snowy plover conservation. We, as you know, as our partners, we love the lake, and we want to make sure that folks are recreating in a way that makes sense for themselves to enjoy the area and also makes sense for the birds.
Thanks, Emily. And I've got another quiz question. And while I'm pulling that up, if you are having any issues, please let us, seeing the screen or anything else, please let us know either in the Q&A or chat. And also remember to put any questions that you may have at any time into the chat as well. All right, here we go. Next question. What is the known percentage of the breeding population of interior snowy plovers found at Great Salt Lake? Is it 10%, 23%, 15%, or 2%? Give you guys a few more seconds. It looks like got a couple of answers that are getting most people's attention here. All right. The correct answer is 23%. So it looks like about half of the folks who answered got that correct.
Awesome. Yeah, so that leads right into our next slide, which is just some information about some other work that's going on in Utah to monitor this population of birds. As Max and Heidi mentioned earlier, so the population of plovers that breed at Great Salt Lake are part of the interior population of birds. And in a 2007-2008 survey and census of the population at Great Salt Lake, it was estimated that the resident population is about 23,500 snowy plovers, and Great Salt Lake makes up about 23% of that inland population. So that's an extremely significant portion of the inland population of birds that use Great Salt Lake during the breeding season as an important part of their life cycle. And so this census took place in the early 2000s and is going to be actually updated this year by the Utah Department of Wildlife Resources. And so that's very exciting. We're partnering with them as well to kind of help them get an estimated, or excuse me, an updated population estimate to see what the trends are from that initial estimate that took place in the early 2000s. So here are our survey sites. As you can see, they're all congregated down here on the south shore of Great Salt Lake. They are small areas, but we do intense surveys where we're searching for nests and covering the whole area of these sites. Each site was selected for the different level of human use that it represents. Our high level of human use is the Salt Air site. Some of you in the Utah area may be familiar with Salt Air. It's a concert venue on the south shore of Great Salt Lake. There's a parking lot, and there's some great opportunities for folks to park and access the lake for recreation activities. So that is our high human recreation use sample site, and then a little bit to the northeast, we have Kennecott Outfall, which represents sort of medium visitation. There's not a lot of places to park, but people do get out there, and you know, there's openings and fences where people can walk on and walk their dogs and that sort of thing. And then this year we're adding a new site where we haven't quite outlined the boundary of where we're going to be surveying specifically, but we're going to be looking to the Inland Sea Shorebird Reserve area to represent our site of minimal visitation as an area that's close to the public and folks don't have access to on a regular basis. So there are 3 elements of our survey design. We conduct nest surveys. We have a camera survey that is ongoing that is associated with our nest surveys, and also a recreational use survey. So for our nest surveys, we collect a intense amount of data about the general survey area, as well as specific information about the nest locations and the areas that the birds are selecting for breeding. We collect data about site level disturbance on a site on a large general level. We also collect data about nest site selection, as well as like microhabitat details, for example, you know, vegetation cover, how far a nest is from certain elements of water in the landscape, that sort of thing. And then we also monitored these nests throughout their incubation period, where we look at how successful nests are, you know, whether they're making it to hatching, and then looking at how disturbance impacts those nests throughout the incubation period. And then if we can, we're also collecting data about how and where adult birds are rearing their chicks. Plovers are unique in the fact that once they hatch, the adults will take the chicks usually a great distance away from that initial nest site to usually a better forage location. And that happens quite soon after nesting, or after hatching, excuse me, because the chicks are mobile within about an hour after they hatch from their eggs. So this is a map of just some of our initial outcomes from last year's survey. As you can see, we had a lot of nesting activity at the Kennecott Outfall site, which is our medium disturbance site, and not so much at Salt Air. We logged a good number of volunteer hours, and we submitted over 100 surveys last year, and we were monitoring 35 nests, which hatched about 38 chicks, which is super exciting. And then we did have one instance where we lost a nest to human disturbance. And this information is in comparison to our 2023 pilot survey, which was the first year that we conducted this monitoring effort. And in our first year, we recorded 73% of the nests that we found as unknown fate, which is compared to 34% of nests that we marked as unknown fate in 2024, most of which that unknown element was attributed to nests that only partially hatched, and we weren't sure why that last egg was still left in the nest cup at that point. But this decrease in unknown fate is due to the fact that we had funding to add nest cameras to our project this year, which was super great, and it added the capacity to be able to understand what is going on and how successful nests are when we're not able to observe them.
Thank you, Emily. And it looks like we're getting some good questions. And so we'll make sure to try to answer those towards the end here. And it's time for another quiz question. So let me get this up here. This is a little trickier. What is the scientific name of the snowy plover? Anarhynchus nivosus, Snowius plovarius, Coridrius nivosus, or Coridrius borealis? And it looks like we've got some answers coming in here. If you're having a hard time thinking about what this might be, I'll give you a hint. It was recently changed, so it might not be what you would expect it to be. Give you a few more seconds. Still getting some answers coming in here. All right. Share results. Okay, it looks like the highest percentage of folks answered Coridrius nivosus. That up until I think last year was correct, and recently with some taxonomic changes, they have changed the scientific name to Anarhynchus nivosus. So those 10 people are 23% that put the first answer in. You are correct.
Another part of our survey design is this camera survey that we're conducting. Essentially, we're placing trail cameras on active nests to document hatching success and determine the source of nest failures, and also remotely collect data on incubation behavior and then the bird's response to different disturbance stressors. And I will turn it over to Chelsea to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, so this past summer of 2024 was our first season implementing these cameras. Prior to that, we were relying primarily on our nest surveys. And what this allowed us to gain a better understanding of how disturbance is directly impacting the birds by observing it from the ground instead of just observing it while we're out there. And so this has allowed us to view different disturbances such as predation, when it actually hatches, any other type of disturbance that it could have resulted in impacting the fate of the nest. And this has been a really great addition to this survey. Overall, we had 26 nest cameras deployed this summer. That is dependent on how many nests we do find while we are doing our surveys. So that can change when we add our additional site this summer. Each camera is set to capture an image every 30 minutes. And it has about 3 rapid fire images every single time it detects motion. Then you can move on to the next one. Oh, there we go. So some observations we're reporting for behavioral, we're going to be reporting every single time we observe brooding, how often pairs switch. Males and females do take turns on their time at the nest, incubating at the nest. So we want to record how often they are switching and under what conditions, how long they're incubating for, how long they're spending time away from the nest foraging, or for spending time away from the nest exhibiting any defensive behavior. And with that defensive behavior, we also want to record the disturbance and what kind of disturbance. So that involves humans, aerials. We get a lot of paramotorists that we've noticed out at in the area. So we want to be able to record that and how that's directly impacting our birds. Dogs, predators, this includes coyotes, ravens, and other type of predatory birds. Ground altering motorized vehicles and also non-motorized. We've seen some scooters and hoverboards, and also how our disturbance is impacting it by conducting this survey. So when we're trapping and banding our birds, and also when every time we have to go out and check the nest or install a camera, that is a disturbance that we're acknowledging on the nest. And so we want to also record how our disturbance is impacting their behavior as well. Here's a video that we got to capture of a coyote And this actually resulted in total loss of the nest. So this coyote just took it for a snack.
Oh my god, ¡Mavi, son huevos! ¿Qué? ¡Huevos!
You can actually hear her shouting huevos. She noticed the eggs. And this was actually a really good learning opportunity for us because we noticed that, you know, our cameras are also attracting our folks out onto the area where the eggs are. So that's why we also implemented a sign as well to allow people to know to stay away. There is sensitive wildlife in the area. And so we want to make sure people are not going near the nest just because they see our cameras. Here's other examples of predators. So we also have a raven. This is a really good example too about how the aerial disturbance, you can see the bird in the bottom. If you want to replay that again, one more time. You can see the bird just starting to kind of reapproach the nest again. So there's definitely some direct disturbance going on there. And then this is just stuff you see out, you know. I believe this one was a Kennecott outfall. But people just go out there doing any type of recreational activities, some that we didn't even think of. And so hoverboarding on a Sunday morning, always fun. Which is cute. And we also get to document hatching too as well, and how long it is between each egg hatches, and if one egg is abandoned, at what point it is abandoned. And so that's other information we can gather from this. Yeah, and so another addition we're adding this year is our recreational use survey. We'll be utilizing volunteers for that as well. And that will be recording the actual disturbances themselves. So that will involve us going out into the field and walking along the survey areas to record the degree of human impact. So if you can change to the next slide. So this will be a 2-hour observational survey. And this is just how we're recording it right at these 2 sites. We'll determine it at the additional site as we, you know, define that site a little bit more. But each entrance, you have a west entrance and an east entrance of each site. And so we'll have 2 volunteers at each entrance, go out and walk along the length of the site and just record what they are observing. And this will allow us to have an additional documentation. And we'll be doing that at all times of the day. So especially for the volunteers that are really interested in volunteering, but they don't know their schedule, or it's very flexible, this would be a really good opportunity to still get involved because we will be recording at different time slots all throughout the day, all throughout the week.
All right, and we have our final quiz question of the evening. Pull that up here. What do snowy plovers at Great Salt Lake primarily eat? Is it pickleweed? Is it brine flies and other invertebrates? Is it seeds? Or is it fish? What is it that the snowies primarily eat at Great Salt Lake? Give it a few more seconds. This one is pretty heavily weighted towards the second answer here. All right. So if you were one of the 42 people who said brine flies and other invertebrates, that is correct. That is the primary food for the snowy plovers, and whether it's brine flies or other invertebrates, somewhat dependent on what's available at different times. All right, turn it over to Tully.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to be talking briefly about some of our MODIS tagging efforts. So for those who don't know, MODIS is a radio telemetry technology. It uses radio signals. And then we have a bunch of stationary stations all around the state and then also the world that is built through collaboration of researchers. And so we tagged a couple of these plovers last year to figure out where they are moving. And then this year we will be expanding our effort a little bit. So we were able to tag 11 birds last year. So if you see these detection rates and receiver deployments on the right, this is actually one of our Wilson's phalaropes, and you can see how much these guys are moving around the lake. Our snowy plovers were only picked up on 2 towers on the south side of the lake, so they're really sticking around that area, unlike the phalaropes, which are moving around a lot. And then the other thing we got to see, which was really cool, was almost all of our phalaropes went down to the Colorado River Delta. There was a few exceptions. There was one that went a little further south into I'm not sure what province of Mexico that is or what state, but the majority of our birds have spent their overwintering period in Baja California. So that's been really cool to see, and it just shows the importance of the Colorado River Delta, which is from my understanding, not doing great right now. So it's great to see that connection between the lake and the river. And so these are just some pictures of our capture attempts with the plovers. So we have our bow nets here. The birds we'd set up this bow net around the bird's nest, and then we would usually, the bird would go sit back down on the nest after a few minutes, and then we were able to undo the trap and the bird would get trapped in it. And then we were able to put that tag on. And some of our cameras were able to capture that. So a couple of things that we look at when we have these plovers in hand, we're looking at weight. We measure the bill length, the wing length. Just with shorebirds specifically, you measure a flat wing length. It's just something we do different for shorebirds versus the songbirds that I majority band. We also look at tarsus length. We look for feather molt. These birds really shouldn't be molting this time of year. So, one of the reasons we look is to kind of see how healthy the population is. Flight feather wear as well, and then age and sex. And sometimes flight feather wear can give us some details about how old the bird is and help us get a more specific age. And so finally this year, we'll be tagging hopefully a few more birds is our hope. But the big thing that we're starting this year is our CTT nodes. And then also we're going to be color banding our birds as well. We're really excited about this. We've been talking about color banding since this project started a couple years back, and we finally were able to get our permits and everything in order for it. So really excited about that. So we will have birds with colorful little tags on their legs, and hopefully if you guys volunteer and go out and survey on the beach, you'll be able to see some of these color tagged birds. In addition, we have our MODIS tags. There's an example of that all the way on the right. There's also an example of a MODIS station here, just so you can get an idea of what that looks like. So the CTT nodes, those actually can use the MODIS tags that we put on the birds and more precisely locate the bird, almost down to like a GPS tag type location. So it's pretty specific. And so we're going to be putting a couple of these out on the beach this year to kind of look at how the juvenile plovers are using the freshwater sources that are coming into the lake from Kennecott outfall flow. And yeah, so that's gonna be super exciting. So you'll be seeing some of these poles with the nodes on top of them this summer, hopefully, if you volunteer.
And finally, we'd like to go over the last couple things here. First of which is the goals for this coming season in 2025. We are hoping to expand our data collection efforts. In addition to all the things that we've been describing to you, you may have picked up that we're adding another site, and the purpose of this is to provide reference of background status quo conditions of the lake where there's minimal disturbance from human activity and the birds are left to their own resources to nest. And it's been really difficult. We've tried another site previously, and it just had access issues, it had flooding issues, it had safety issues for the human surveyors. So we pulled out of that one. And so this year we are going to try that other one that Emily showed you earlier. And the reason for that is to try to be able to determine, to tease out the effects of these different disturbances that we've been talking about versus nesting conditions where there's no disturbance. We also want to include, as Chelsea was describing, the recreational use in snowy plover nesting habitat. And there's a couple other things that we hope to add to that in addition to the remote surveys that she was describing. We are looking at doing some in-person surveys and some other techniques to track where folks are going, which sounds kind of creepy, so I won't get into that right now. I probably shouldn't have said it, but it is just to help us understand how the activities that people do out on the how the people use the beaches of the lake, where those areas actually overlay and interact with these nesting grounds so that we can actually get some spatial data for that. We're looking to grow our volunteer network, and Bryant's going to talk about that some more next. We really couldn't do this without you, and yeah, you can get involved in just about any aspect of our program. So he'll talk to you about that. And then lastly, for me, we are always improving our tools that we use out there. We've pretty well figured out our experimental design. And yet we had to figure out the how-to all along. We've replicated some work that other researchers have done in the past. We're adding these new techniques with the MODIS. That's fairly new on the palette of the avian research rolled out here in the West. And so, yeah, we just are trying to improve our tools there and also to help the volunteers understand what we need them to do in a very timely manner and feel, provide them the competence they need to carry out the tasks that we need their help on. So with that, I'll turn it to Bryant to bring it home.
Yeah, so this is a volunteer project. So we are looking for people to help us out. So we've kind of alluded to this the whole time, but we can't do these surveys without volunteers to help us. So if you're watching this and you haven't helped us before, I see a lot of people here that look new to me and you want to get involved, you can click on that little QR code and it'll take you to, we have like a landing web page that we run on the Tracy Aviary Conservation website. And the first step is for you to kind of fill out our volunteer application, and then we'll get back to you with some with our training schedule. We're going to have like a crew for doing the cameras, a crew for helping with the rec surveys, as well as people helping us do nest search surveys. So we have lots of opportunities. So just scan that QR code right there, and that should take you to the landing page to fill out your information. If that doesn't work for you or something goes wrong, you can just email me at bryanto@tracyaviary.org as well, and I can direct you where you need to go. And thank you guys. It's been great, and I hope to see you in the field.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryant. In addition to that QR code, if you didn't catch it, you can always reach out to us, but I also, in the chat for everyone, I just put a direct link to the project website on tracyaviary.org. And now I would ask Emily if we can, there you go, if our panelists want to turn on their cameras, we can go ahead and start answering some of these questions. We've got some great questions. And I'm going to just call out some people I think would be good to answer the questions, and I'm happy to follow up as well. Feel free to jump in, panelists. So our first question is from Layla. And this was early in the presentation. We were talking about the inland or interior breeding population. And so Emily, Layla's question is, does this population migrate to the shores of the ocean, or do they stay inland?
That is a great question. And that's also something that we are trying to answer, and a question that will be better identified when we have tags on birds that are using Great Salt Lake for breeding. There may be some overlap between birds that travel between the coastal population and the interior nesting sites, but we don't really think that there is, but we don't, have a definite yes or no to answer that question. And the more information we collect on these birds through the Modus tracking network, as well as color banding and identifying birds through that methodology, we'll have a better understanding of how they're using these landscapes and where they're traveling to and from.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. All right. Our next question is from Patch, and I think Patch has a couple questions, but this is a great question. How many eggs are do you find in each nest approximately? And Chelsea, I'll let you answer this one.
Hi, yeah, so we have approximately 2 to 3 eggs per nest. And most 3, but sometimes we'll just have 2.
Thank you, Chelsea. All right. This is a really good question, and I will attempt to answer it, but any of our other panelists that want to jump in after, that would be great. Kay Kaler, who I know fairly well from other projects, is one of our volunteers from Colorado, asked, I may have missed this, but in Eureka, there are signs and netting that were set up for the Snowy Plovers. And have you done either? That is a great question. So I didn't know that in Eureka that they were doing that, but I know all along the California coast, with the coastal population that is listed, that using closing off portions of the beach to ensure that there's minimal disturbance to nesting birds is a pretty common practice. There's also signs that tell people where they shouldn't go and to avoid walking their dogs in certain areas. And this is one of the things that we are hoping to achieve, I think, with our program is the lake bed of Great Salt Lake is sovereign lands. So it is managed by the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, which is part of the Department of Natural Resources. And our sovereign lands are often managed for multi-use purposes. So, ensuring that the public can access land, for recreation, for hunting, for other things. And, we have met with them in order to inform the division on how they should manage the lake bed in certain areas when it comes to certain types of activities. They want to see the data to help inform the decisions that they make. And so that's one of the outcomes that we're hoping for is, by showing these different types of disturbances, whether it's predators or especially humans, if we can show the data to back up like, hey, it would be important for you guys to improve your signage or to rope off certain areas or prevent access or certain activities in certain areas. That is one of the outcomes that we are trying to achieve with this program. Anything else to add?
I'll just add that Snowy Plovers don't have the same legal protective status in Utah that they do on the West Coast in California, Oregon, and Washington. They're listed on both the state and the federal level. Whereas in Utah, they're not listed. I mean, they're listed as a species of greatest conservation need, but it's not the same as a endangered species listing that you see on the coast. So they don't have the same level of protection here, which is one of the reasons you don't see that same degree of signage and closing of beaches in Utah.
Great, thank you, Brian. So this is another question from Patch, and I think I understand what Patch is asking here. And Heidi, maybe you can help me answer this one. But thinking about conservation with snowy plovers, how are conservation efforts helping them with all of these different human-related disturbances that are occurring?
So I think that's a good follow-on question to what we were just discussing. Knowing that they're not protected by federal rulings, and we are just working with the state, and we're in this window of time when efforts that we can do can help hopefully bend that curve so that we start seeing rising numbers in the bird population. And so conservation-wise, what likely will happen is a strong education component rising out of our work. We need to do these surveys to document whether or not we do have a problem. And once we do, if we do identify a problem, we look into ways to try to mitigate that, to make it less. And so it isn't likely to be our first action to recommend posting and closing the beaches. People here in particular feel very entitled to go out and do what they want to do out on the shores of Great Salt Lake. But if we can just educate them about, hey, there's these little birds that you probably might not have even noticed, or if you have, they're in trouble, they need our help. And this is the kinds of areas where we know they're nesting, and we can recommend to the agencies, the Forestry Fire State Lands Agency, of the hotspot nesting areas. And maybe those are the areas that we focus on recommending, less, maybe less activity out there. We don't know what that looks like at this point, but I think we have definitely got the attention of the agencies that manage the lake and those resources. And they're very, very interested and supportive of our work and wanting to work with us. So it's going to be a sort of a soft, not a hard conservation effort, through working with the communities and educating them. And that's what these recreation surveys are for too, to just try to figure out what it is they come to the lake for, and then use those opportunities to say, by the way, did you know we have these species of greatest conservation need that we are concerned about, and wanting to learn how to help them, and you can help by doing this and this and this.
Thank you, Heidi. And Deborah, thank you for the note and for your great questions. And then also, I know Brian Larson said, how sensitive are the birds to human disturbance? And I think we've covered that fairly well. And just from the perspective of going out and doing these surveys, these birds are very sensitive to all sorts of activities. You get within visual distance of a lot of these nests, and those birds are immediately aware of your presence and where you are. And so, whether it's human disturbance or other predators, snowy plovers, I think, are pretty well known for their sensitivity to activities in and around their nesting habitat. Okay, we have another question. I think this one will be for Bryant. Would we have to reapply as a volunteer if we volunteered at Tracy Aviary in the past in different departments? I used to be an aviculture volunteer, but I am now interested in conservation as well.
The short answer is yes. Just so that we know that you're on our radar, it couldn't hurt to fill out that volunteer application form again. There is kind of done on a yearly basis as far as like the liability stuff. So yeah, please do. Even if you're not sure if you've signed up with us before, please do fill that out. So yes.
Thank you, Brian. All right, we still have a few more questions. Keep them coming in. These are good ones. So we have a question from Leslie. I think this is kind of maybe some interest in potentially becoming a volunteer, but how often are the surveys done? So how often is it, or would a volunteer be going out? And Chelsea, if you want to answer that one.
Yes, so for the recreational survey, we're going to be doing time slots throughout the day. So it could be starting from 6 a.m. all the way up to 8 p.m. And there'll be 2-hour long time slots that you can sign up for. For the nest surveys, last year we held them twice a week. We did them, Brian, I believe, Monday morning, and Brian can speak on those.
Yeah, we did them Sunday mornings and Friday and Thursday mornings. We also did additional trainings in the spring Friday evening. So with the new site this year, we'll probably try to increase that a little bit, and especially if we get more volunteers. So maybe 3 times a week, but not any individual, like a single person, a single volunteer would only be going out maybe once a week at the most, unless you really wanted to. But you could, yeah, three times a week, somebody would be going out.
Or 3 different times. And I'd also just mention, you know, I think we're expanding into this recreational survey. And so, you know, depending on what type of survey, whether it's nest checks or, you know, helping with our cameras or the recreational aspects, there's kind of different levels of activity for volunteers to participate and contribute to the program. All right, thank you, Chelsea and Brian. And then we got a question from Holly, and I'm going to throw this to Emily, who is our piping plover expert as well. Would enclosures like what are used for piping plovers help?
That is a good question. And again, I don't know. Exclosures on the East Coast are very successful, and a lot of different programs use them. For those of y'all that don't know what an exclosure is, essentially it's just like a large circular wire cage that are either between like 2x2 wire squares, so the birds can still fit through and access their nest. And then the cage is covered with like a mesh netting on top. So essentially it allows the birds to incubate and then keeps predators away from the eggs throughout that incubation period. Those like exclosures have been successful on the West Coast as well, with the coastal population of snowy plovers. But we have not tried them here in Utah. The only reason I can think of that it would be really difficult is because the substrate of Great Salt Lake is very, very different than the sandy substrate and like coarse cobblestones that most coastal beaches the birds prefer. So, you know, Great Salt Lake is very dynamic in its surface area, especially the playa. It tends to get very saturated, very muddy. I just have these images of an exclosure sinking into the mud and never being able to be removed again. But I think, you know, as we progress in the program, it would be a really interesting component to experiment with, and also to see, you know, the predator's response to those structures as well. So something we have in the back of our head and have been researching a little bit, but we're not at the point in our program that I think we are able to implement that element.
Thank you, Emily.
I just will add, I think in order to do that, you have to have permitting to do that. You can't just put a cage on a nest because you want to protect it. It also is going to be a big visual clue to anyone around. So you can't do that without the education and signage aspect of it, right? If you just put a bunch of cages, everyone will go out to the cage to see what's in the cage. So you would have to do the signage and education aspect along with the beach closure or the beach.
Totally. Yeah,
thing.
and
It's
Yeah,
it's maybe a long-term goal, but it'll be a while before.
yeah, and
Right.
on, the west and east coast, those cages are behind those closed habitat areas as well. So excellent point. Yes.
Thank you, Angie, for putting that new link in there. So Michael, thank you for pointing that out. It appears at this point on Tracy Aviary's project website where it's the little yellow tab that says join the Snowy Plover project, had the wrong link. It was a link to register for this presentation, this webinar. So we will get that corrected. But in the meantime, Angie has put the correct link to the form into the chat. We will also make sure that when we follow up with the recording of the webinar, that we'll have the correct link in case anyone missed the QR code or would like that link at a future time. Okay, couple more quick ones here. I know we're coming up on top of the hour. Question from Allison. Do you guys accept summer volunteers? I'm an out-of-state student that comes back to Utah for school breaks, but would still love to help out. Bryant, if you want to answer that one?
Yep, you can just do 1 or 2 surveys with us, or you can do them every week with us. It's, a volunteer position. So whatever your schedule allows. There's some minimal training that you would have to do the nest searches. But a lot of times we just train as we're doing those surveys. So it's pretty open.
I might add too that the busy month is June going into July. And so that would be perfect timing, Allison. So, just as long as, you would go through the protocol that we have for training volunteers and bringing people on.
Yeah, just
Plenty of time.
to give a timeline, we're going to start the trainings in April. So April and May will be like field training time. And then the actual surveys will probably be starting like mid-May, but they really get going in June and July. That's when they're doing most of their nesting. Into early August. I think about August 10th was when our last chicks fledged last year. So early August would be kind of it just depends on when we run out of eggs to check, when they stop laying eggs, but usually it's early August sometime.
Great, thank you, Bryant. And we have a good question from Susan. If we can only participate 1 day a week, can we stay longer than 2 hours for the recreational survey? Susan, so I think we are still developing our protocol and trying to choose kind of random times to ensure that we are hitting different times of activity with people going out to these locations, whether that's weekends or weekdays, mornings or evenings, midday. So I think, if you're only available 1 day and you want to do more than 2 hours, I think that's something that we can definitely work with you on. It might be that we have you stationed at one location for 2 hours and we move you somewhere else. But we're more than happy to work with you as we kind of develop that recreational survey protocol to think about, how much you want to contribute to the project in a given day.
Could I add something, Max, to that as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no worries. So we also have those 2-hour time slots for safety as well. It gets really hot out at the on the beach. So like if you're doing early mornings and you want to do longer, again, we're still developing the actual time slots, but that would be an option. But if let's say you're only available midday, I would not recommend going out for longer than 2 hours if you're starting at noon, because it will get very hot and you probably won't want to be out there for longer than 2 hours.
Alternatively, one other thing is that there are other aspects to the recreational use surveys. So say you were out on the beach doing the remote surveys that we've been talking about, but there's also in person where you could be stationed at a entry point to salt air, let's say, and we could provide shading for you so that you could stay longer in that. But doing the same kind of survey for more than 2 hours, probably not. But we can work with you.
Thank you, Chelsea and Heidi. All right, and I know it's 7 o'clock. There's one last question here I see in the chat. from Steve. Is there an age limit for volunteers? And I think that kind of ties into our last response here. Depending on what type of survey you're doing, your activity level that you are comfortable with. I think we're going to have a variety of opportunities, and some of those, I think if you're a bit older and maybe you don't want to hike around on the hot, dry playa, maybe those recreational surveys may be better suited for you. But again, I think we can work with our volunteers to try to understand, what their comfort level is. So I would say no, there is not an age limit, and that we're willing to work with folks who are interested.
With the caveat that I think minors have to be accompanied by an adult. So, and then I think generally we've kind of capped the lower age limit at 14 for our volunteer program. If you really have someone who's younger than that and they're super interested, we might be able to work with you on that. But generally 14 years and older, and anyone under the age of 18 would have to be doing the survey with their guardian, because we can't really be responsible for a minor out there. So, but the upper age limit is just based on your abilities, really, and that's more your call than our call, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Bryant, for that clarification. All right, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully that was informative and piqued your interest in snowy plovers and our work here at Great Salt Lake. Again, this webinar is being recorded. We'll make sure to follow up with a link to that recording, and also ensure that we have the correct form when we send that out for folks that are interested in volunteering. So thank you and have a wonderful evening.